Hey everyone, welcome to what is it called? Thoughts Between Shots. Good
That's right. It's your
Off
thing.
to a great start. Hey everyone, welcome to Thoughts Between Shots. My name is Nammy Sirur, and this is a podcast all about stories. Why? Because I love stories and I love bringing you good storytellers to demonstrate why storytelling is such a great form of communication, and also the questions that start these good stories. Today, I have a really important guest. I'm not going to go into his credentials until we hear his story first. Andy.
Hello.
Hello. I have a question for you. Tell me about a time when a defining moment in your personal life ended up actually having a huge impact on your work life.
This story actually begins on an Austin Capital Metro bus in the fall of 2013, believe it or not. So I was riding the bus because I couldn't drive anywhere. I just kind of wanted to get out of the house. My mom and dad were living with me. I was 30 at the time, so this was kind of weird. I wasn't really going anywhere in particular. I was just riding the bus to kind of pass the time. I know who does that, right? But I had my headphones on, and it was headphones like these, right? They weren't wireless earbuds. They were headphones that you plugged into to your phone. And I was listening to the Wu-Tang Clan album from 1993. It's called Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers. Everybody just calls it 36 Chambers. So this was a record that I listened to in high school, basically on repeat, so hundreds of times for sure. I knew all the words to all the songs. So on this night in 2013, this song came on, The Mystery of Chess Boxing. And for the first time in months, I could remember the lyrics and I started crying. I started crying right there on the bus. And I'll tell you why. So on April 22nd, 2013, I was 30. Like I said, I was in grad school. I was getting a degree in basically international public policy. I didn't have a car. I had a motorcycle. So I didn't have a car by choice. I just rode my motorcycle around. So that night, I had met my cousin and his wife, and I was returning home, and it wasn't really all that late. It was like 10 in the evening. It was dark, but it wasn't that late. I almost got home, but the way that my neighborhood works is you basically go up a hill before you go down to my street. You sort of crest a hill. The street has speed humps, so if you're on a motorcycle, you ride between those to avoid. You don't have to go over them, right? So I get to the top of the hill, and when I sort of crest the hill, I see this young girl who's skateboarding in basically in the middle of the street, and she's skating between the road humps as well. And so it was kind of decision time, right? Like I had to put down my bike or I was going to hit her and I was for sure going to kill her. And I wasn't even going that fast, but it's just, you're going 25 on a motorcycle and that was not going to happen. So that is, I put my bike down. I remember sort of deciding to do that. And that's the last thing that I remember for probably a good month or so. Um, I woke up, I mean, I have smatterings, right? I woke up in the ICU. My parents and my brother and my sister were there. I had no idea what was going on. But it turns out I had an injured my head pretty bad in the crash, and I had a traumatic brain injury, a TBI. And so for the next few months, I was basically relearning stuff. I laugh about it now, but it was pretty rough, right? I was learning how to count again, how much a quarter was worth. Um, and also, I didn't have a filter, right? So I had to figure out how to talk to people and how to say things in polite conversation, things like that. It was not good. And the thing was, though, the physical and occupational therapy, it was kind of annoying, but the most frustrating part for me was it didn't feel like my friends and family they didn't trust me. It felt like they didn't trust me anymore. And what I mean by that is I would say things um and they would just kind of brush them off. It was sort of like, Andy's brain doesn't work anymore. They had reason to not to not believe me. I was saying some crazy stuff. Um but every time that happened it was so frustrating um because I just wanted people to recognize that I was talking, right? And the thing was, even if I wasn't making any sense, it felt like I wasn't being heard. And I wasn't being listened to. My mom, my dad, my sister, especially my brother, who has been my best friend since we were little kids, they just didn't acknowledge my thoughts. And that was really frustrating. So it would kind of go like this. Hey, Joe, I'm going to hop on the bus. I'm going to walk around the hike and bike trail. Joe would say, no, and you're going to stay here and rest. That's basically how it always went. It was just super frustrating, right? And it got so frustrating that we actually ended up in family therapy. And if you know my family, that is not a natural place for the Irish Catholics to hang out. But believe it or not, the process was great for us. The therapist listened to my frustrations and actually communicated to my family sort of what I was going through. The therapist also voiced sort of what they were up against too, and it was this nice sort of mediation of these ideas, which was great for us. It changed our family dynamic forever. We say "I love you" to each other now, which we never did. It was great, and it was just sort of one of those things that um, 12, 13 years on, it really has. I was sort of reflecting on this idea, and it's made me, the whole process has made me a better listener. I think it's made me more empathetic. I think maybe more honest and more transparent. Um, so my job is basically to ask people questions and then listen to them. But I say that all the time, right? Like my job is basically to listen. I'm a radio reporter, and so my work revolves around the human voice and telling stories. And because of the frustration of not being heard and my thoughts and words basically being dismissed, I feel like now I'm just much more sensitive to those feelings. Basically, when I ask people what they're worried about, and that's basically the only question that I ask anybody all the time, um, it allows me or sort of compels me to be honest with them, so that I talk about what I'm worried about, and I talk about, it might be getting the story in on time, um, but it really is sort of that transparency that wasn't, I don't think, instinctive to me in the job before this. It was really sort of this idea of listening and being more empathetic and transparent, and I think that helps tell a story, a better story. So I still haven't figured out the mystery of chess boxing, but at least I can follow along and I can recite the lyrics again.
Yay, I love that story. And I've clearly heard it before
Sure.
because big reveal. Andy is actually my husband.
Mhm.
So I think I heard that story on one of our first dates,
Yep.
and it's such an impactful story, but also one thing I love about this podcast and why I wanted to feature you and other people I know that have really powerful stories is that
Hmm.
a lot of times you don't talk about these in your work. I've never heard you actually tell the story in public. So actually, yeah, let's get into that. What do you
Sure.
actually do for work?
Yeah, no, I've been in public radio for a whole long time. I was a sophomore in college here at the University of Texas, and I heard a story on Morning Edition on NPR, and I walked into the local affiliate's office. They had just set up a newsroom, and I took a job as an intern at from 5 to 9 in the morning. And I've basically been working in public radio ever since. For the last couple of years, I've been a research fellow at the University of Texas Energy Institute. But it's basically, I produce a podcast for them. It's basically still storytelling. And um, yeah, no, it's funny because I tell other people, I sort of ask other people to be really vulnerable with me. And I tell their stories and I try to sort of get that out there in the most transparent and honest way that I can. But no, you're right. Like this doesn't, turns out this doesn't come up a whole lot when I'm reporting on the energy industry.
We've talked about this.
Hmm.
One of the first things we connected on was the idea of storytelling and how both of our jobs require us to pull stories out of other people.
Yeah.
And when I made the transition, so I used to be a video marketer. Then I made the transition to becoming a communications coach and working with immigrant professionals.
Hmm.
And I found that in all of these things I've done, um, the idea of being able to tell stories, it's so important because
Hmm.
it is such a tangible skill that you can get acquire, but something that so quickly like changes the way you communicate, right? If you learn how to tell better stories,
Mm.
it's the easiest way to level up your communication.
Yeah,
And a lot of people don't quite get the power of storytelling. Um, and you actually, it's so important in your day-to-day life,
sure.
right? And in your day-to-day work.
Yeah.
What do you think are the important elements of a good story?
Yeah, so we think about this all the time, and even when I talk to other people who are doing similar work, or I'm impressed by something that I read or listen to or write, there are some pretty central ideas, right? Like you have to have something and probably somebody that you connect to in the story,
Yeah.
and so that sort of personal human connection. All the time when we start out a public radio story, there's sort of like, there's kind of a trope about the BBC starting all of their stories with a stand up outside of somewhere that's making sound,
Yeah.
right? Um, but there's a reason they do it. It's because it sort of puts you there as the listener. And there's sort of these things that we do that our brain does when we're trying to digest things. If you have some sound that sort of puts somebody there, that's doing a lot of the work. And so we talk about this often in my line of work, especially when you'll have a piece of tape, and I would have editors who would try to edit out, pauses and things like that. And I would push back and say, no, 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 that pause or that sigh or something like that is telling way more of the story than that next sentence that I come in and sort of dictate to the listener. And so, really, especially in my line of work, in my medium, so much of it is listening, and so much of it is trying to figure out a compelling way to tell the story and interact with somebody's ear.
Mm.
Because ours isn't, this is obviously some part visual. Ours is theater of the mind stuff, and you sort of have to think about what this piece of sound is going to do to somebody, where it's going to take them, and how that's going to help me avoid having to say a whole lot of words. Basically, if you can let the tape do the work for you, it's going to be such a better story.
Ooh, you said something
Hmm.
that I loved. Can you explain more? What is theater of the mind?
Yeah, so I remember getting some training right when I started out. I was still a student, I was still an intern, and we would have these little basically public radio trainings, and they would talk about and they'd use as example. Remember, like back in the day when they would read stories and have plays on the radio,
Mm.
because there wasn't TV. And so they would play things out on the radio, and so much of it was about, like you'll see cool documentaries about this where they'll have somebody playing like the drums or something, and
Yeah.
that's actually a bomb that's happening, like all that kind of stuff. It's very cool.
No, I'm
But
laughing because there's one really funny Frasier episode
sure.
where they have to like enact the whole
It,
murder mystery on the radio.
Exactly, right? And so that is pretty literally, I mean, it was theater happening over the radio. So
Mm.
when I think of theater of the mind, it really is sort of this idea of how you're using whatever faculties you can sort of use and address to tell a story. For us, most of the time, I mean, obviously, I'll get some sound of where I am. I'll get some, I'll maybe use some music, something like that. But often it's sort of the human voice. And again, I go back to this all the time, but I think a lot of times people are telling you a whole lot with how fast they're talking, how slow they're
Mm.
talking, the sort of thoughts that they're taking in between. They're telling you a whole lot. And so my job is to listen and understand exactly what that sort of message is.
Yeah. So there's another part that we didn't cover, which
Mm.
is the question or the prompt.
Yeah.
What in your mind, especially in your profession,
Mhm.
makes for a good prompt or question?
Yeah, it's funny because I tell people all the time, I basically ask one question in all of my work. And it's, what are you worried about?
Mm.
And it's funny because it doesn't matter if it's a research scientist who's doing, advanced nuclear research, whatever. They're thinking about something and they're spending a lot of time thinking about that one thing. And so I can basically ask that question and listen for a response, and then I'm going to draft all of my questions based on that one response. And so people ask me all the time, if I come to interviews, basically with questions sort of lined up or written out, And often I don't. I really am very honestly just asking that one question, and then I'm trying to figure out. Maybe I have based on their the literature that I've sort of read, maybe some of the different things that they've done. Maybe I've heard them speak before, so I have an idea of where they're going to go. But most of it is how they react and how they answer that one question. That's gonna be 15, 20 minutes of an interview is going to be based on that one question, that one answer.
Uh, so the reason I'm focusing on both the prompt and the story is that both are important when it comes to communication, right?
For sure.
Like a lot of communication, success in communication happens not just at a job interview or in those formal settings, but in
Hmm.
those informal settings, whether
Without a doubt.
yeah, you're at a dinner party, a networking event, or I don't know, yeah, water cooler talk. All of that is like going towards making an impression of who you are as a person. And like it really, really matters because people are constantly forming impressions of you and
Hmm.
opinions of you, right? So the
Hmm.
better you are at both asking questions and telling stories, the better of an impression you're going to be making. So let's talk about your story,
Sure.
the one you told in this episode. So, how did you craft? Let's think about the elements. Why did it work?
Yeah, no, I thought about this a bunch when sort of thinking about how to craft this story. Um, Basically, what I love doing, and this works in public radio, it worked in the job a lot, is you sort of come full circle in your story. So you start out with an image, and for me, it's me crying on a bus eventually, right?
Hmm.
You're kind of left with what's going on. So I'm sort of setting you up. And I really do. I sort of think about it like now, most television shows, the reveal is in the first episode, and
Yeah.
then they'll sort of walk us through how they got there. Like White Lotus is a perfect example, right?
Yeah. It's the
Like
cold open. Yeah.
exactly. And so then that journey is how do we get back to the start?
Hmm.
And so for me, it's the reveal. The punchline is there at the top. I just started crying when I listened to a Wu-Tang song on the bus. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And so then after that reveal, I can get you there. And it really is sort of it's basically three parts, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so it's the reveal and then how did we get there? And the top part is this happened to me. Um, then that's sort of the segment. If we're going 3-1-2, the one segment is basically this happened to me. The two segment, this is how I was, this is why I was frustrated. Back to the three, I know
Hmm.
the lyrics again, right? And so
Yeah.
we've kind of come full circle. I like referencing that same song and that same um basically, yeah, that same song and that same feeling right at the end, because then we've come full circle. And I think there's something really genuine about for people who are listening to stories, like the payoff is there because you sort of you went on that journey with me,
Hmm.
right? Um, and so yeah, no, I think it's pretty formulaic, but I think there's a reason that it's a formula, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing was that, yeah, you said it like you took people on a journey with you
Yep.
because a lot of storytellers or people who probably don't consider themselves storytellers, but just communicators
Hmm.
forget to put in those sensory details. So they'll just kind of narrate or give you the Cliff's notes.
Yeah, yeah,
And that doesn't help because it's not memorable if I don't like visualize, oh, this woman was skateboarding in the middle of
sure.
the speed bumps and then you had to put your bike down because you were cresting the hill and it's all those like really it's those details that sort of stick in your head and become
Yeah.
memorable.
Yeah. And it is. It's little things like it was about 10, it was dark, it wasn't super late.
Mm,
You're sort of you're prodding all of those sensory elements the whole time. And so, even, she was wearing all black. Which is another
mm.
element I could have added. Probably should have.
Yummy.
Um so yeah, right.
I mean her,
And
not you.
yeah, sure. I mean, I also missed the opportunity, but no. Some really good editors of mine used to. It's funny because we would write the story, and when you're working in public radio, you have 3.5 minutes to tell this massive story about something that's really complicated. And I had a really great editor who would ask me details about like shirt color and things like that,
Hmm.
and then we would, it's so funny because I would write basically after he prodded, we would expand the story for another couple of minutes, right? And so then we had to cut another minute and a half. It would be, a 5 minute story and we needed a minute and a half out of there.
Hmm.
And inevitably, it would be the details that we put in there. But it was great because for me, as the person who was going to be narrating that story, I could see it.
Yeah.
And so even my vocal inflection was different because that detail
Oh.
was in there. And so even if I cut it out of the story, it
Yeah.
was there in my mind. And so the inflection that I'm making, the sort of sensory thing that I'm doing with my voice is different just because that detail's in there.
Hmm. Is that sort of like when people say smile when you're talking on the
Oh, for sure.
phone?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it just changes
Yeah.
something like energetically.
Yeah, we would do that. I'm sitting here with a microphone, and so we would do that all the time, right? Like I can hear your smile. I can hear. There
Mm.
are things that I do, and it's kind of a crutch. When I'm live on the radio, I find myself kind of laughing a lot. I'll
Yeah.
say something, and then I kind of back into it with, oh, maybe he's joking,
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of a crutch. It's a little bit of a conditional. Um, but it ends up being you're just hanging out with me. I'm your buddy and we're laughing together. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of the tone that I'm going for. And sometimes it's completely involuntary. Sometimes it's like, oh, I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah. Which is absolutely people like something people can use even when they're not necessarily radio
Yeah.
personalities, right? They can still, like, whether you're on a podcast
Oh,
or
for sure.
whatever it is, like, you can use those certain ways to sort of disarm
Yep.
your audience.
Yep. No,
Yeah, I love that.
people can hear your smile for sure on the phone.
Yes.
Certainly when you're in front of a microphone. Like there were stories that I would voice that were fun stories, right? And so you're pretty literally smiling the entire time because that's
Mm.
the tone that you want the listener to sort of come away with. There are some stories that are sad,
Yeah.
and so you're sort of portraying that with your face, even in the studio, even if it's just radio. So no, for sure you can hear that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, Andy Euler, thank you so much. What is some exciting stuff you're working on if people want to look you up and stalk you online?
Yeah, no, it's cool. I have a podcast at the university. I told you I was a research fellow at the University of Texas Energy Institute. I have a podcast that I'm producing for them, and it's basically this cool little travel log. I'm going to different cities throughout the state of Texas and just talking to people about. I'm basically asking them that one question, right? What are you worried about? But I'm talking to them about the energy transition and basically how it's manifesting in different places throughout the state. And so the answers that I get in Midland are totally different from the answers that I'm getting in Austin, are totally different from those in Houston and Beaumont. And so it's fun. It's yeah, it's on Spotify. It's at the Energy Institute website. And then I have a whole bunch of sort of one-off things. I'm doing a podcast about Kenya. I'm doing some work in India too, so a lot of international stuff. We were just in Japan and did some work there. So lots of cool. It's great because I sort of have this job where I'm just the job is to ask questions and I get to tell those stories.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here with us, Boo.
Of
Uh,
course.
and thank you all for listening. I will be back with more of these episodes and we'll feature more awesome guests with more fantastic stories. So stay tuned. Bye.
Bye, y'all.